Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Charter School Connection. My name is Dallin Wortham from Charter Connect, and in this episode I had the pleasure to speak with the CEO of Rainier Valley Leadership Academy, Baionne Coleman, along with some of her staff, Leah Reisberg and Lenny Emperado. They were fantastic. They gave such great insights. I was taking notes like crazy because almost everything that they said was gold, and it was just like they were reading out of like a book full of just fantastic wise quotes. I got a lot of insights from it, and I know that you will as well. If you enjoyed just half as much as I did, then you're gonna have a great time with this episode. Feel free to reach out to us over at Charter Connect with any questions, concerns about the podcast, about our community. Join our Facebook group, the Charter School Connection. Sign up for our newsletter, and reach out if you would like to be a part of our podcast. We're a growing community of charter school leaders. So the best way to grow charter schools is by doing it together. So without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Rainier Valley Leadership Academy in Seattle, Washington. All right, RVLA, welcome to the Charter School Connection podcast.
Thank y'all. Thank you for having us today.
Fantastic. Well, I'm very excited to meet with you all because with charter schools, as we know, each charter school is different. Each one is unique, but you guys are extra unique in some really fun ways, because when I meet with charter schools and I ask, what makes you guys different? What makes you guys unique? It's typically like, oh, well, we offer this program, or we do this, or we have this machinery or this software that our students get to play. And that's all really awesome stuff. But you guys, your culture is very important. Even though I'm excited to, let's just start with this really quick before I even get into introducing you all. I thought it was very unique when I would mention your students. You guys said, hey, we actually don't call our students students. So what do you guys call your students at RVLA?
We call our students scholars. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, why do you do that? Because I think that's awesome. I just found it really interesting.
Yeah, so typically with our population of scholars, of the global majority, we are not always referred to as scholars, right? We're always looked at from a deficit approach. And so we never get the opportunity to actually be able to show, how intellectual we actually are in many education spaces. So by supporting scholars, by calling them scholars, only continues to support them with being able to represent themselves as scholars. Like if you tell a scholar that they're bad all the time, they're going to live up to that perception of being bad. When we call them scholars, they're going to live up to that perception of being scholars, and that's who they are. So that's why we call them scholars.
And if you look at what a scholar used to be, right? Let's go back in the day. what a scholar used to do, that was their only thing they did. Their only function was to learn and get information and be a scholar. Everybody else was working and doing things, but a scholar in the old times was somebody who that's all they did.
I love those answers. This podcast is going to be a really awesome episode. I love that. Thank you so much. So for those at home listening, we have Lenny, Leah, and Baionne from Rainier Valley Leadership Academy. And Baionne, let's start with you, if that's okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the charter school world and eventually RVLA.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington. My mother was an educator. My grandmother was an educator. So I come from a legacy of teachers, basically, and made it very clear, coming from a family of 12, grew up right up the street from the school that we're currently running now, that I did not want to go into education because I did not want to be like my mother. I was like, no one needs to be working this hard. Like, this is ridiculous. So I was like, I'm not doing that. And I don't know very many young girls that are like, I want to be just like my mom when I get older, right? So I was actually going to be an attorney. And my thought process, because my parents were also within the juvenile detention centers, working with youth and et cetera, helping support them through education and different things. I started to begin to really early on, before there was like a school to prison pipeline conversation happening, that our youth that were in detention centers were not being educated properly in the education institutions that they were a part of. And then further listening to conversations between my mom and dad, I was also able to recognize that like most folks who were actually in the prison system weren't reading at an 8th grade level. So for me, there was a correlation of, if I can work doing family law and supports young children who are coming through the legal system, then my thought process was, instead of just sending them to jail, I would actually make sure that they were getting literacy programming. So literacy was always like a really big thing in my house. And so I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Like, that's going to be my contribution, but I'm not becoming a teacher. While I was in college, I kept on like going out to schools and tutoring in different places and supporting with literacy supports. And then I was at Howard University for a couple of years, and my mother needed financial support. And so I moved back to Seattle. And when I did that, I started to attend University of Washington. And at University of Washington, like, I had a professor who was basically like, look, like, you're going out into all these schools, you know, you're our America Reads coordinator. Like, why are you going to law school? You know, and I was like, because like, that's what I'm going to do. And he basically just kind of posed me with the question of like, you know, do you want to do intervention or do you want to do prevention? Because you really need to make a choice. You know, and he was like, and everything that you're showing me right now is prevention, but you're going to go into an intervention field. And I think like at that point, like I was like, all right, this guy's kind of right. So let me just go ahead and figure this out. Simultaneously, I also had like another big event happen. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer about 6 months after I had came back. So based off of that, like I also began to see my mother in a completely different light, right, around like education and all the work that she did, et cetera. And so I was like, this is really someone that, like, if I can be a fraction of this woman, then like, I'll be awesome. You know what I mean? Like, so I think those two things kind of simultaneously happening at the same time. And then my mother passed away. Like, I had really committed myself all into education. So I was already working in nonprofits, like teaching, et cetera. I didn't have a straight and narrow path into education by any means, because originally I was going to school to be an attorney. So I was teaching in different places. I had a bunch of teaching pedagogy behind me just because of where I had come from, what house I was raised in, but I had never gone through a teaching program necessarily. But I was teaching English. I was teaching debate. I taught preschool all the way through 8th grade in different spaces that I was in and whatnot. And eventually, I also began to become an administrator, but I also didn't have principal certifications either. So when I went to one of my schools, I was hired as a support for classrooms. And then I was also hired as the after school program manager, and then also to teach in a classroom. And about 6 months after I was there, they were like, actually, that's not going to work. We just need you to be an administrator. So I started basically doing everything as an assistant principal. I was there for about 9 years. Then I started to recognize like something's not right here. Like, I'm an assistant principal, but like my pay, from what I'm hearing, like my other colleagues who are making assistant principal pay are making, is completely out of whack. And in my organization that I was in, I was the only Black person in the entire organization, a person of any global majority period in the organization. So there were some things that were happening that I was starting to recognize. And I was like, I got to do something a little bit different. So then I was like, well, let me just go back and get my teaching degree. Let me go back and get my administrative certifications. While I was at Seattle University getting my admin certifications, one of the professors there had a conversation with the Washington Charter Association, and they were looking for folks that they thought could be principals in the different charter schools around Seattle and in Washington. And the head of the education department at that time was basically like, you don't need to wait till this one graduates. Like, I have one for you right now, kind of deal. And I didn't know he was having this conversation, because I was like good at my school. I was just wanted to be paid more for the work that I wanted to be paid for the work that I was doing. And so the Charter Association approached me, had a conversation, said, hey, we think you might be a really good principal to sit in these spaces. Like, would you be willing to have some conversations? I had some conversations, and I ended up going to open up a Washington-based CMO, which was Impact Public Schools. And during that process, worked with community, K-5 programming, built out, education models, social emotional learning models, et cetera. Really felt like we were doing the work that we needed to be doing as far as like bringing community along and, hearing from community and building something based off of community. And then after being there for a while, like I was like, something's askew, like there's a lot of tokenization happening. There were, but basically seeing some things were askew and like seeing that there was a lot of tokenization that was happening. And so I got to a point where as a community member, I felt like the folks that I was leading the school with were not actually holding the vision and mission that we had originally created together. So I had made a choice where I either am going to be complicit in this place and like completely dupe our community and put them in harm's way and be a part of the problem, or I'm going to walk away and I'm going to walk with community and try to rectify this situation to make sure that they can still be safe in spaces and whatnot. So at that point, I was actually, after 20 some years of education, I was going to walk away from education altogether and just walk with community and like really do what I could to support with kind of figuring out like, what does this system look like that I help create, and how do I make sure that this doesn't continue to cause harm in our community? And at that point, some other community members and some elders kind of reached out and they were like, great timing. Like you've left that organization. Like, we need you to come over here to Rainier Valley Leadership Academy. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, that's a mess over there. Like, I'm not doing that. Like they, and what community explicitly was asking for was because they also had a national charter management organization who was here. And so they were like, we need to move them out of our state altogether. And so like, we need you to come in and help kind of like clean house and reinvent what RVLA is as a community-based school, which was like a dream. And at the same time, like, I was like, it always takes longer to clean up a mess than it does to make a mess. And like, at that point, like, I was burnt out from education after 20 years of like being a Black person who's sitting in spaces and is the only one in those spaces and watching the harm that's being done to youth that look like me. Really just went against the grain of why I got into education in the first place. So I was like, I'm all the way out. Like, I'm going to do real estate. Like, I'm good. I'm not doing it. Then some of the elders got involved and they were like, look, you need to hightail it over here and do what we're asking you to do. I still said no reluctantly to the elders, but I was like, nope, because y'all don't have to do it. I have to do it. So I still said no, and then just continued to reflect and just got to a point where I was like, if I don't do this, then someone else is going to do it and they're not going to do it properly for community. And we're going to have the same situation that I had to leave before. And so spoke with the board, had some conversations, went through like 9 different rounds of interviews to be hired here to make sure that I was qualified. And then started as their principal for the first 2 years, worked with community to re-envision what we wanted a collaborative community school to be. And we all agreed that we explicitly wanted to have an anti-racist, and we all explicitly agreed that we all wanted it to be an anti-racist school that was collaborative community and really focused on scholar leadership. So from that point, I synthesized what community wanted, recreated our vision and mission, supported with communicating to the commission and getting our strategies together so that we could then move this large organization out of our state and became an independent district based off of that. And that was in 2019, well before the pandemic hit. So a lot of folks were like, y'all are crazy, that language is too strong, you shouldn't be using anti-racist language, et cetera. You can't say, like you can't say you're anti-racist. You can just say you're identity affirming, and that type of stuff. And we were just very clear that this is explicitly who we are, and we're going to be very, authentic to who we are. And we're no longer going to sacrifice our comfort for the comfort of others who are actually trying to harm us. Then the pandemic hit, and then it became that everyone was actually like, oh, now we're all anti-racist. Now we're all really focused on, Black and Indigenous youth in spaces and whatnot. And so we had a lot of folks come back to us after that and like kind of apologize for their trying to deter us from being who we actually are. So.
Okay, so that was incredible. I have so many questions. I have been taking notes of my questions, and so for all the listeners and for you guys on this call right now, just know that we're not going to be able to answer all these questions that I have. We're going to have to do a round two sometime in the future, because this is, man, holy cow. Before we move on with those questions, for you, Baionne, I want to introduce Lenny and Leah so that we can have the other two characters on this call join in a little bit. And we're going to be right back to you. But before I introduce them or ask them a little bit more about themselves, that dinging, that is fantastic. That there's like a bell in the background. That is charter school all the way. I love it. That is great. School is in session. And so let's start with, I don't know, let's do Leah, and then we'll do Lenny. Leah, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the charter school world, and I'm sure I'll be collecting a lot of questions about you and Lenny as well. I got a good list over here. So Leah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. I kind of like Baionne. I never really intended to be in education. After graduating, I got my undergrad in sociology. And then I ended up going to a master's program in California, San Francisco, that was like a very unconventional kind of like progressive school called New College of California, and it was a program called Activism and Social Change. So it was like a pretty unique program. There weren't a lot like it, and that's what I was looking for. I didn't really want to go back to like a traditional school. Yeah. So I started there, and it ended up, the school had been around since the 70s, but as we were there, a lot of things started to surface. There was a lot of corruption going on behind the scenes that had been going on for a long time, and the administration was lying to the students about it. So being activists, we organized, and we got articles written about it, and we tried to uncover and reveal all of the corruption that was going on behind the scenes. And the Department of Ed ended up freezing their funds, and the school closed. And so I was kind of left with all these like credits that didn't really, there is no other activism and social change program that I could like transfer my credits to. So the accreditors decided like, okay, we messed up. We shouldn't have been giving credit to this school. So what we can do is you can either do a teach out, and you can really quickly teach out of this program and graduate with a degree from New College of California, or you can go to another school that we accredit and try and find a program that you might like, and will allow you to transfer almost all of your credits into that program. I didn't want a degree from that school because it was corrupt, and, I didn't really want to be associated with it anymore. So the closest thing I could find was a degree in education. So I transferred my credits and I got a master's in education, but I really didn't want to be in education. So I never really, I just did it because it was like, well, what else am I going to do with all these credits, And so then I started to work in kind of like education alternative models. So like after like programs that were for youth that were struggling in school, nonprofits, things like that. And it got kind of a idea of like how schools work and some of the problems within the school, and things like that. And then I decided to, okay, well, that didn't really go as planned. So my friend was applying for a PhD program in education at UW. So she was like, you should just do it. So I applied, not really thinking I would even get accepted. Obviously not a big planner. I just kind of go with the flow of things. And I got in. So I was like, well, I guess I'll move back to Washington and start this program and see how it goes. So I did. But I didn't like it. Coming from the other program that was really cutting edge and really progressive, UW kind of seemed kind of conservative to me in a lot of ways. And it was difficult for me to figure out where I fit in that scene. So I didn't finish the program. And I literally was like, never going to do education again, done. I was just kind of like, worked for a newspaper for a while. I would did some home renovation stuff with my uncle who was a contractor, all kinds of just random things. And my brother was working for a company a food company that delivered food to charter schools in the area. And he was like, hey, we're looking for somebody to help out, to serve some meals. It was easy. I just wanted something simple, not complicated. I got to work with my brother, who's my best friend. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. That sounds fun, Mm-hmm. And so I did that for a while. And the charter school I was at, was kind of another Green Dot school. It was kind of run of the mill. It didn't really seem that different from the regular public schools. And they asked me if I wanted to get more involved, but I couldn't get a feel for what they were doing. It didn't seem any different than public schools. So I declined. And then this other charter school opened that was a truly independent charter school that was also one of the first Black run, Black led for the community they serve schools with Dr. Sullivan. She wrote Cultivating Genius of the Black Child. And they hired me on. And I got to know her really well. And I started doing para work and things like that. And I really was like, wow, this is kind of something I would actually want to be part of, And then that school closed. And so I was like, well, okay, I'm out of education again. I'm not going back. I'm done. That's it. And then, the charter community is really small. And the COO at RVLA, they were going through a lot of changes. They were looking for somebody and they asked me if I wanted to come there. So I was like, okay, sure, I'll try it out. I really didn't know. They hadn't really put out their new mission and their new vision yet. So I didn't know exactly what RVLA was going to be all about. And then when I got there, I was like, I have the feeling this is I'm going to like the changes that are happening here. I didn't even know what the mission was. I just had this vibe. I was like, it seems like something's in the works. And the people from Ashe were kind of like, just wait. I think you're going to like it, give it a chance. So I did. And I ended up loving it. And I really truly believed in what they were doing. And I didn't really even think that this kind of thing was happening in Washington State. And it wasn't until then. And so just from there, I kind of started to do other work within the school. And they had asked me if I wanted to do other things within the school. And this time I said yes. This time I was like, yes, I do want to do that. I do want to be part of this. And so that's how I ended up here.
Oh, man. Yeah, this is going to be having all three of you on the same podcast. We have a ton of stuff to cover and we won't be able to cover it all because I also have a lot of questions for you. Great. That was fantastic. Let's move along with Lenny because I want to jump into these questions that I'm sure people who will listen to this also have. So Lenny, if you could kind of tell us how you got into the charter school world and if it was just a fraction as interesting as what Leah and Baionne said, then it'll be fantastic too. So
it's going to be way better than both of their stories, babe.
Yeah, now we have a competition going.
My journey to charter schools, chapter 1. I actually started, I was doing an after school program here last year. I'm brand new, brand spanking new to the charter school world, right? I've been in traditional public schools. I've been working with youth that are involved in the court systems, and I was working with the Boy Scouts. I've always been working with youth since I graduated from University of Washington, which we attended together. So there's another connection of the journey of how I got here.
Nice.
And so I ran a martial arts program last year, and kind of that's where I first saw how RVLA worked, what they stood for, because I didn't know anything about it. I had previously been talking to Baionne about this and other things. So if she's involved in it, then you already know there's value, because we already have a community. So a lot of things and a lot of folks that are involved in RVLA are a part of the community already or have come from the community. So there's that piece of value that's why people come here. And then that's kind of what got my attention, because I was not interested. I was doing my thing at Cleveland High School, doing CTE, doing careers, doing all that stuff, internships and running those programs. And working on my business, my gym. So it didn't cross my mind. But after doing the after school program, I was like, so you're like, this is your school? Like, there's no other systems that are blocking your greatness, right? There's nothing like this is your building. This is your school. This is your program. It's like, that's it. There's nobody else. There's no bigger district you have to check in with, right? So I thought that was really cool. It's like running your own business, really. And everything, as an entrepreneur, everything is on you, right? You take risk every day. The bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. But you also have the mindset of, if I don't get this done at a certain level, then everything's gonna fall. So it's really on you and on the people that are with you, your team. And I actually went to school with some other folks here that were already on the team. I got to meet some new folks and just get background about RVLA. And so one day, I'm minding my own business in Lenny's world, and Baionne calls me.
Baionne's phone call.
Baionne calls and says, hey, what are you doing? It's like, are you interested? Are you still looking for something, right? I was like,
yeah.
I don't know. What do you mean? What do you mean I'm looking for something? I'm good, I'm cool, I'm chilling. And then she was like, can you come in for an interview tomorrow morning? This is already in the evening. And she's asking for me to come into an interview, which I don't know what I'm interviewing for, tomorrow morning. And I'm about to leave out of town as well, right? So I'm like, you know what? It's Baionne. There's already value there. So I'm like, now I'm curious, like, what are you doing? What are you talking about, Baionne? What are you trying to rope me into? And I'm easily roped into stuff. I'm curious. I want to see what you're doing, right? If it's a cool opportunity, like how do we make it work? Especially if it's with you, right? So I come in for the interview, which I don't know what I'm interviewing for. And no, you didn't.
Okay.
And then so you know how you're supposed to get the interview questions before the interview, like at least 5 minutes before, 10 minutes before. No questions. I just go in. And they start asking me interview questions based off of a job that I don't know what I'm interviewing. So I'm answering these questions. don't know what I'm interviewing for. Then they're breaking it down after we get through that. And they're telling me like, hey, here's the need. Here's where we're at. We're growing. We're expanding. We need to grow our staff, grow our students, grow our scholars, and we need to reach out to the community. We're at the point now where it's either, you know, you're coming from a new, as a new business owner, you either stay where you're at or you make a decision to grow, and you need to invest in that. And so that's where they were at right now. They told me about the opportunity. They told me the risk, and it sounded so great. It sounded great. They sold me. They sold me. She knew that I wanted to be in the community. I wanted to build for the community. I have a lot of resources. I have a lot of networking. I've been working in the community in different capacities for a very long time here in Seattle. Although I'm not from here, I've built up quite a bit of a network. And so I've been looking for an opportunity to kind of give back, right? And this was like in the stars. And so a little bit about my background in education. I was in like that kid that's in the single class, like all by yourself in elementary, right? So I was the kid in the class all by himself while everybody else was in a regular class. I just had a lot of energy. I had a lot of thoughts. I wanted to draw. I wanted to create poetry. I was very creative with my skill sets, and I couldn't sit there. And school wasn't, it just wasn't made for a child that is so creative and has so much energy. They didn't have any outlets for me. And so it turned into punishments, right? And then working in the juvenile, working in traditional schools, they're still the same. Even at University of Washington, they didn't have a lot of systems set up for kids of color when they come in. There's no systems where there's an outlet that culturally responds to your needs. They didn't have the staff. They had a couple people, but as a whole institution, it was not there. You have to purposefully build that in. And so me and education have had a fight our whole life. And there was a point where I didn't feel like I was, worth much as far as my skills or what I had to offer, because everything was a punishment. Until I got into college and I started meeting some folks, and I had some mentors, and I got into the world, started working with youth, and then I started contracting with folks and kept meeting new folks. And it's like, hey, did you meet Lenny? He does this and this. So all the qualities and skills that I used to get punished for, sent to a room by myself all day, now I get paid. People are requesting services, right? Like, it's crazy, the flip that happened. And so that's still happening to youth right now. And luckily, I had opportunities to get out of that cycle. But what about all the students that don't have that opportunity at other places? But here at RVLA, we see you, we see the families, we listen for value, we understand circumstances, we understand perspectives. And so we can speak to you in whatever language or whatever culture you're coming from, based off of shared life experiences. We can model an education program around your family and your student. So that's why I'm here.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. I mean, there's a lot that I pulled from that. One of the things that I jotted down was just no outlets lead to, unfortunately, in a broken system, punishments, which is not, I thought that was really profound. Well, fantastic. Let's jump into this question because, man, I just have so much on my mind. let's start with, just for people who don't know anything about RVLA, when did it start? What's the history behind it? You know, yeah, we just want to know day one, what did that look like?
Yeah. So as I kind of hinted to previously, Rainier Valley Leadership Academy was a group of 3 schools that was ran by a national charter network. And they had closed down 2 schools in the greater Seattle area. Let's see, they originally opened, I want to say like 2017 was when they first started, or 2017, 2016 was when they first opened up, and they had the 3 schools, one in Seattle, Washington, which is RVLA. They had one in Kent, which was Excel. And then they had another one that was out in Tacoma, and I can't remember the name of that one exactly, but they were all under the same umbrella with the same national charter network. When they closed those 2 schools, they knew ahead of time, but they didn't let community know that they knew ahead of time. And so there was some frustration around, and RVLA was actually going to split into the middle school being in one building and the high school being in a separate building. And so when they decided that they couldn't support these other 2 schools because the other school, I think they were having issues with enrollment or something to that matter, they just decided that they were going to close the 2 schools. And community from RVLA was pretty much like, you're not closing down our school. And when they told families that they were closing, it was in June. And families basically didn't, in Washington State, in the greater Seattle area, you get to go to a choice school if you apply by February. So families knowing in June that they had to then go back to their neighborhood district schools that they were frustrated with, did not give them any opportunities to like apply for any other type of schooling or scholarships, or to apply for choice schools within their respective areas or anything like that. So there was and they were also being told, like, these are the teachers who care about you, and all of a sudden, like, none of these teachers are gonna, like, whatever. So there was a lot of frustration that happened. RVLA was like, we're not gonna allow that to happen to us. At the same time, the RVLA staff was very frustrated by the things that they were seeing. And I'm still not here at this point, right? So they're frustrated by what they're seeing. And so that summer, I believe, they had already had about 50% of their staff leave. And then throughout that summer, they pretty much had the other 50, we'll say 49% of their staff leave, because only one actual teacher stayed with the organization that was from that year prior, from the 2018-2019 school year. At the same time, they're communicating with me to say, hey, come over here, come over here, come over here. Like, community's like, we need you. So I'm assuming also that all of the teachers that were here previously are also the teachers here, as are the families. So when I'm hired on with the full staff, and the full staff is all a new staff minus that one teacher. They also didn't communicate to families that that was actually going to happen. And that none of the teachers who were here previously, that they weren't actually coming back. And only one of the teachers from that high school was actually going to be coming back. So when families stepped in on day 1 of 2019 school year, that fall, they were all like, wait, hold on. Like, it was, I don't know if you've ever read the book Coraline or seen the movie Coraline, but it's like, it's a book where, you know, like, they take the family, replace them in their actual dolls with like button eyes, right? Like, it was kind of like, it's like a whole separate universe. And so it was kind of like that for our scholars and families walking in the first day. It's like, okay, we interviewed this principal, we know who this person is, but we thought all of our teachers were coming back into the spaces, right? Like, this is our new school building, everything looks great. You know, like, what is actually happening? And at the same time, they also increased the size of the school by 50% over that summer, right? So
That's
all
crazy.
of those scholars who were at some of the other schools that were closing, et cetera, like they were like, oh, everybody come to RVLA, as well as other, you know, folks who, you know, weren't in, anybody who's opening up a school or that's in school in education knows that like you cannot increase enrollment by 50%
Yeah.
in one summer and expect for you to be able to hold culture or for folks to actually be able to like just all, and on top of that, you have a completely new staff of pretty much 100% of your teachers. As we started to do some of our audits and digging, at the same time, this charter network, this national charter network had pulled out all of the systems from RVLA. Whoa. So the student information system, like phones, like every system that you can think of that like you have to do like for a whole year before you ever even start a school, all of them were pulled. And then it was like, oh, here's a new system. So when I needed to contact a family, I would open it up our student information system and it would just be the name of the scholar. There was nothing else there. Like, I don't know who your parents are. But I'm like, I don't know who your parents are. I don't know what your phone number is. I don't know what your address is. Like, I have no information right now. So now I've got to try to go through archive folders to try to figure out, like, how do I communicate with this family to make sure that they're being taken care of? Man, I think one of the other things too, yeah, it was pretty wild. Also at the same time, when you have scholars, middle school and high school scholars who are feeling like they are abandoned, they communicate in two different ways. They either communicate physically because of their frustrations, or else they communicate verbally because of their frustrations. And neither one of them are going to be anything that's positive because they've been hurt and they have a rightful place to actually be hurt in that space. Like no one communicated to them that their teachers weren't coming back. No one communicated to them that all these new kids were going to be in their classrooms that they didn't know and didn't have relationships with. So there was a lot of frustration from scholars. And so they acted out because of it, you know, and they were also like, you're going to just leave us too. You know, so there was just a lot of frustration and pain within the community that was happening at the same time. In addition, through our audits, we also started to discover that like almost 50% of the teachers had never gone through a teaching program and were all emergency sub-certificated and were not necessarily equipped to be working with anyone in education, as well as specifically our scholars in education. Holy cow. And they signed up for an old vision. They were receiving a new vision and mission. And they're like, we also didn't sign up. You know, some of them were just, you know, very explicit. Like, I didn't sign up to be a part of a school that is going to, you know, actually talk about race. That's not what I want to do. That makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to be here based off of it. Like, I don't want to have those conversations. I don't want to have to, you know, like if the kid's not learning, like that's their fault. You know, like those types of perceptions were very present in some of the teaching staff that was present that year. And so there was a lot that really families were like, nope, we're not going to do this. We're not going to close down like the other schools. I got to hurry up and find another school for my child now before the school closes down. But essentially the conversation with community was very clear that we had to do something different. And we knew as a community that the school was not set up to actually succeed or excel to be able to be where we are at today. It was more so like, let's throw some folks in the pot so we can say we did what we needed to do. And like, let's move on. And like, we can kind of wash our hands of this and we're done. And, you know, whatever happens kind of deal. And thankfully, based off of community support and the families who were like, no, like we're digging in our heels, like we're really going to do this. We're going to make this happen. And the tenacity of the teachers that, you know, were like, no, we're staying, like, this is exactly what we want to do. And being able to pull different folks from other places and seeking those folks out, because there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, well, you know, we just didn't get enough global majority teachers, you know, to come to us, or we just can't find the right talent for that position. And we were like actively going out and like knocking on doors, making phone calls and saying like, hey, we know that this is your area of expertise. We know that you're really good at this. We need you here right now, kind of deal. Yeah. And through that type of hard work and seeking folks out from community and within community and having very honest and transparent conversations and being very resilient and just, saying we're not going to give up. We're not going to just acquiesce to other folks, setting us up for failure. We're going to take that and we're going to do something different with it. We're going to be successful. That's why we're here still today.
Wow. Okay, so first of many questions in my head and many on paper, I think it's vital, obviously. Every successful charter school that I speak with, they unapologetically know who they are. It's easy to say that. It's really hard to do that. It's so hard when they have so much pressure and people with different interests involved. How have you maintained, your strength in staying where you are and you know who you are and being true to yourself, even with all the external pressures that come with running a charter school?
I think I'm going to let Leah and Lenny answer that one, as I think the folks who witness certain things instead.
Awesome. Well, Leah, if you want to go ahead and answer a little bit to that, that'd be great.
Okay. I think
So I'm not the person continuing to talk.
How do we maintain our brand? How do we...
Oh, there she is. Leah, you got it?
Oh, yep. Sorry, my internet is being weird. Were you answering it, Lenny? Or sorry, me. Okay. I'd say you stay true to it because you know that it's the right thing to do. I think you stay true to the vision because you believe in it and because there is no alternative. Like the other alternative would be to fail the community because this is what they want. They've spoken, they've told us, the elders have told us, this is what's needed. This is what will be the difference in what we're doing compared to what the other schools are doing. We have to be different because they're here because the other schools weren't working for them. The other schools they were at were failing them. So if we just give in and become just like those schools, we have no business being open, basically. And I think that if you really understand that and you really believe that, then nothing will stop you.
Whew. Man. Lenny, can you one up that one? I love that. Thank you so much, Leah.
I won't one up it. I'll just piggyback on that. It's an inside joke. It's an inside joke. So the community decided what we are based off of our pillars. They decided, hey, these are the values. This is your mission. This is your vision. This is who we are. This is what we want. As individuals that make things happen in this school, we all come from that same ideal of what they already chose as an identity and as a brand. So we can't even be anything else if we wanted to. Can't be a McDonald's, can't be a Burger King. That's who we are. I can't change it. Well, go ahead.
The way that you and Leah expressed yourselves with that question, I admire a lot. I'll sometimes as a marketer for charter schools, I'm always asking charter schools, what makes you different? What makes you unique? And oftentimes I'll say, oh, well, we focus on American history or the Constitution, or we focus on STEM and technology. Like, but who are you? Oh, well, yeah, I mean, we have like this nice gym. And no, who are you? Who are you? And I think you guys have a really good grasp on exactly who you are. And like you said, Lenny, like you don't have another option when you know who you are. Like that. So that's fantastic. And Leah, the way that you said, you know, if we like what we have no, you know, we shouldn't be in business if we're just going to be exactly what everyone else is. Like, so I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And which leads me to my next question. I feel like whoever you are is really based on who is on your team and your staff and your teachers. Baionne talked about this a little bit with teachers that were kind of roped into maybe something that they didn't really stand behind and they didn't really last because of that, which leads me to now wonder, how do you guys make sure that you hire the right people to be able to, you know, serve your students and be able to lead your mission? How does that hiring process work at RBLA?
Yeah, so we have a pretty extensive hiring process. I think I would start by just simply saying a part of it has to do with being able to sit down in front of someone as a global majority person. And in like to take one step back, as folks of the global majority, we have to assess the situation when we walk into a room almost immediately to figure out if it's a safe situation for us or if it's going to be an unsafe situation. And that's a matter of 30 seconds, right? And so like I can go into a room and be like, that person has great energy. I need to stay away from that person. This person is that thing. That person is going to be that thing. Or, you know, like you have to make some quick decisions based off of how folks are looking at you, you know, how they're dealing with you, how they're interacting with you just within the first few minutes. So I think as global majority people sitting down in those spaces to sometimes interview folks, like you instantly kind of have somewhat of a read on, is this the right energy for our community? And I would also say, like, through the pandemic and having to do that online, that was a very, very difficult thing for us to work through, because I think we made some decisions even then where it was like, once we kind of got we weren't face to face. We did not sit in the same room with some of our teachers for a year based off of the fact that we had the pandemic happening. So there were some folks where we started to sit down with them when it was time to come back, and we're like, whoa, this isn't the right feel for the school kind of deal, right? Just based off of that, those quick decisions that you have to make in order to assess whether or not you're safe or not in spaces. Yeah. I would say as far as like a actual process, we have a pretty extensive process where one, we go out and we seek folks who we know are a part of community to try and bring them into our space. And that's really important for us, because if we have folks who are from community, then it becomes very difficult to say that, well, I'm just not going to do my job and I'm going to do whatever I want to do, right? Because regardless, you know, I tell folks this all the time, but regardless of what position I hold, wherever I'm at, I'm going to always be a part of my community. So I can't escape that. I have to go back home. I'm going to still run into folks at the grocery store. I'm going to run into folks at birthday parties. I'm going to be at a backyard barbecue, and I'm going to have folks asking me about how their children is doing, or why this person is doing that, or why this person is doing this. I'm going to have the elders who are going to call me or come to my house and pop up because they have a question or they need an answer for something specifically. So there's a different level of accountability when you have folks who are from community being in these situations, because you can't fail, right? Because it's not, I can't just drive out of this community and then say, like, I'm going to go back to my home that's 45, minutes away from here or whatever, and never have to see anybody else again, right? Which a lot of our charter school leaders sit in those spaces. I plopped up a school in a space. I don't live in this community. If it doesn't go well, oh the hell well, I get to drive back to where I want to. I'm going to be with my family and friends, and I'm never going to see these people again. For folks who are a part of community, that's not the same thing. Like, we have to do our job, because if we don't, then someone's going to come for us, regardless of where you think you're going to go. So I would say that that's really important for us too, is like bringing community as much as we can into the space so that we all hold accountability and ownership of what is actually happening. But then we also hire for the things that we believe are very important. So we hire for social emotional learning from our adults. We have conversations with them. We let them know ahead of time, like, you're going to do circles. Like, we're going to practice some indigenous circle work. We're going to, do restorative circles, and if that's not your thing, because you feel like you're not touchy feely or anything like that, then this really isn't the space for you.
Could you expound on what that is? What is a circle?
Yeah, so with our circles, we use a combination of indigenous circles and Valor Compass circles. Valor is another high performing charter school. And they've taken indigenous circles basically and have kind of created an outline for what that actually looks like different steps that you take based off of like trauma-informed practices, which circles are intrinsically trauma-informed because they come from community who addresses trauma directly from indigenous communities. And I think it's important when we talk about circles, we also understand that we're not talking about just North American indigenous folks. We're talking about folks who are indigenous populations across the globe who have all been doing circles for a very, very long time in order to deal with harms that happen in their community, to have conversations in their communities, to make sure that there's equity and voice, and that everybody's diverse perspective is actually being heard. And so that's essentially like what our circles are. It's a space for us to come together as a community and to say, and we do kind of like homework or what we call badge work, where there might be something for us to actually reflect upon or do in that space. Like there's a homework assignment that we need to bring. And it's actually a self-reflection homework assignment for us specifically as the person who's bringing it to circle. But what that does is like typically when you're walking around a school or a business or any organization that you've ever worked in, most folks kind of congregate in the lunchroom and you kind of get to hear some people's stories because they're talking loudly or you're like, oh, that's happening with that person. But as an organization or as the adults who are in those spaces, you actually don't know those things unless someone else is telling you or unless someone directly comes and tells you that this is what's happening with me. So by having circles and by us doing these self-reflections, we can bring that. And then all of a sudden, regardless of me and Lenny never talk to each other because he listens to, rock music and I listen to country music. And so like, we don't have any interest or whatever. I'm now learning something about Lenny and I can say, oh, our favorite color is yellow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we connect based off of that, based off of this story that you told today, based off of your self-reflection about who you are as an individual. So now instead of me going behind Lenny's back to go and talk about him, I might actually have pause and be like, well, I can't, like, that's not cool because like, I know that he's going through this thing right now, or I now have some relationship with him to be able to connect in a different way that I would have never connected with him otherwise. So we explicitly do that with our staff, and we do that with our staff based off of social emotional learning because we feel like it's really important. And most adults do not exhibit the skills that they're asking for children to exhibit. So we do this work with our scholars. And if we're asking our scholars to do it, then as the adults and as a board, then we also should be doing it as well. So we explicitly hire for that, for like the understanding that you are going to continue to build your social emotional learning skills. You are going to be asked to share about yourself. And it's up to the person how deep or not deep they want to go based off of whatever they're sharing. So there's still a level of like autonomy in that space for them as well. But you are going to do this assignment, and this is a part of your professional responsibilities in our space, because for us, professionalism is community. And that's not always in other spaces. I think to the same degree, we also do that with anti-racist practices, right? So like we have very explicit conversations around, like what is anti-racism? Like what is your definition of it? How do you address it? Like what are the situations that have occurred for you? What hasn't occurred for you? Like how do you want to grow in these spaces? Like let's have a conversation, about some articles that we read together, et cetera, to just better get a better understanding of, are you going to be able to have a conversation when a scholar comes to you and says, actually, that thing that you did today was pretty racist and it really harmed me in this way? Are you going to be able to take a step back and not get defensive and say, well, like, dang, hold on. Like, that's what happened. Like, we need to pause class and we need to actually have a conversation about something that I just did right here and right now that like, we have to make sure it doesn't happen again. Right? Like we need to rectify this situation. Or I need to do a restorative conversation with the scholar because something I said was harmful to them and they came back and they said, hey, that's not okay. I think in a lot of spaces, like scholars don't have the opportunity to tell an adult that they're wrong and actually have an adult apologize to them for it and say, like, this is how I'm going to get better to make sure that I'm teaching you. And so we need for this two-way feedback loop to actually happen with our adults, because that's how we also coach as well. So being able to coach teachers and being able to say, like, hey, and a coach may say something, or, you know, someone that I'm coaching may say something back to me, and I'm like, oh, that's good. Like, I need to reflect on that. I need to change a little bit of my practice here as well. That's good feedback for me. So it has to be a two-way feedback loop. So, and then we're looking for skill. But I think ultimately what we have a very clear understanding on is that racism is murder. And so the moment that we put folks in front of our children who are exhibiting racism explicitly in front of them, and even non-explicitly in front of them, like, it's a murdering that's happening to their souls, right? And by educators standing in classrooms and not actually teaching and putting that onus on the scholar to learn, rather than for us to actually make sure that they're receiving the information that we're supposed to be getting to them, then that creates neighborhoods that we don't want to live in. Right? That creates situations where scholars are going to go out and be murdered. And so we have to ask ourselves as the educators in that space, like, are we going to be complicit in that? Are we going to be an accessory to murder because we didn't do what we were supposed to do in a classroom, because we didn't have a conversation that we were supposed to have, because we didn't work on ourselves as the adults in the social emotional learning aspect? Were we not empathetic enough, or whatever the case was? So our hiring process looks a little bit different. And I think, like to Lenny's point earlier, like, we go out and we seek that talent out that we want to see as well. Like, we don't just wait for it to come to us. So,
wow. It's listening to all three of you speak. It's very clear that you are all very intentional with the words that you say and use, and that words are very powerful. Like, Lenny likes poetry. And like, ever since he was little, like, words were powerful. Baionne, every little word that you say, like, is so intentional, and it is so, there's so much meaning behind it all. And the things that you guys, like, the phrases that you use are actually a little unique to me. I'm kind of trying, and I kind of understand them via the context, but I love that. So like, back when we were kids, the saying was, you know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words never hurt me. And we would just kind of say whatever we wanted. And if anyone got upset by what we said, then, you know, they're wuss, or they're less than, because they're too sensitive. Can you, if someone at their school is listening to this podcast, they're a leader at their charter school, and they notice that language has maybe degraded a little bit, and they don't have a very safe, sensitive place, how would you tell that person, or what advice would you give them to be able to change that? Because it's really hard to change the way that we speak. For example, I say you guys all the time, even though I have a team of just women. And one of them said, like, hey, like, not a big deal. Like, we love you and everything, but let's not use you guys anymore. And I said, okay, like, thank you for letting me know. And even though she's told me, I always just say you guys. And it's so hard to break that cycle, but I'm working on it. What advice would you give someone who wants to change something that's so hard to change?
So you said something. Does the person want to change? Does the person know they need to change? Right? So before, you were unaware.
Yeah.
So you have to be put in a place, or something has to happen that makes you aware, right? RVLA, we're going to make you aware.
I love it.
Then there's the want, there's the acceptance, there's the reflection. You're like, yeah, whoa, because I went through the same thing. I was like, man, you know, I say these things a lot. I say these type of things based on today's environment and society. Things are not the same as they used to be. Before, you could say you guys, you could say all kind of stuff without anybody thinking of anything. or maybe they were, but nobody said anything. But now it's more out front. So you have to adapt with the times. You have to be in a place that is healthy, that somebody could say that to you and you accept it and you reflect on it. And you have the social emotional awareness, the skills to, after that, act on it. And then every day, it's not just, it doesn't happen just right away. Just like you said, you're like, I have to keep working on it. It's not a one-time thing. So now it has to be important to you because those other people or how you show up or the relationships that you have with your team are important to you.
Yeah.
When the trouble comes, when it's not important to you or you view your team as less. Like in society, we have all these issues. We have crime, we have murder, we have abuse by government departments. And it's because people don't care. People see other people as less, right? So there needs to be a balance of all those things.
Well,
if I could add something too, I think there also has to be a conversation and a why behind it as well, right? Like if someone's just coming and saying like, don't say guys anymore, right? Like, how does that make you feel when I say guys, right? Because now that's being cemented with me about how that actually affects you. And then I can give you some context as to like why I continue to say guys, right? Like, or can you help me by, like catching me every time or saying something to me, about it when I do it. I think, there are some things that being able to understand the power of words and how they affect people. And also being able to have an understanding of how those words have affected different people based off of the color of their skin, based off of how melanated they are, how non-melanated they are, also sits in a space of like privilege with words as well, right? For example, we have a colleague who goes by they, them, and one of our elders called them by a different pronoun. And it was a conversation because this elder was like, that doesn't, I have to instead say this person's name. I can't say they or them because for me, it's a very traumatic experience. Because when I was younger, if I didn't use proper English, I was beat by my white teacher as a Black young lady. So for them, like, they're like, I can't say they and them if it doesn't grammatically make sense in this conversation. But what is another respectful way that I can call you, by your name and still honor who I am as well, right? And it's like, oh, just call me by my name then. Perfect. I can do that, right? But again, like, you don't understand that if you're not having a conversation, right? Like, you're not understanding that this has been a whole PTSD situation for this person. The moment that you ask them to say they or them, and they're like, I can call you Baionne. I can commit to that. I can make sure that I do that for you, right? Like, I want to respect where you're coming from. And so I can do that, but I can't do this other thing. But the conversation now is supportive of, now I understand that by you doing that, that brings back all of these emotions about you literally being beat by a white teacher who was telling you have to use proper, grammar all of the time. Yeah. Right. So it's a conversation and it's a why, right? Like, we use global majority. We don't use people of color. I'm not going to call you a people of no color, Dallin, right? Like, it sounds offensive. But for other folks on the other side, they're like, oh, well, no, that's fine. That's not a big deal. No, it is a big deal, right? I don't want to be called a person of color. Like, when it comes from a deficit-based mindset, but saying global majority, because more folks across the globe are actually melanated, that's a fact. And it also gives me a sense of pride in who I actually am. And so it's about being able to understand why we use language, why we call scholars scholars. I want you to live up to being a scholar. I don't want you to live up to being a bad kid, right? So I'm not going to call you a bad kid. There's no such thing as bad kids at RVLA, right? They made a mistake. This should be a healthy place for them to grow. But when we understand those types of things and we can have those conversations based off of language and understanding the power of language, our minds don't support negative comments being made to us. That only causes us continued harm.
Yeah.
And so by knowing that and by understanding brain research, then we can have a conversation about the power of language. And now we can use the power of language to actually support the relationships that we have, right? By you changing guys to y'all will be supportive of now having folks in your organization, right, to say like, he's no longer calling us guys, he's calling us at least y'all, or he's using this other term. And I also recognize why this is so hard for him. Maybe you have all brothers, and so it was always you guys in the house, or whatever the case may be, right? But like being able to have those conversations, it's not just, I need you to do this because it's going to make me feel better. It's, I need you to do this, and this is the reason why. And if you can't do that, what can you commit to so that we can make sure that we have a relationship that we can be respectful towards one another in?
And now y'all have more trust in each other. Now y'all have more value in each other because you see the effort that goes into the negotiation.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. This conversation is so elevating. I did not sign up for this. I said, hey, do you guys want to do a podcast about charter schools? And I didn't ask for a TED Talk. This is fantastic. Keep it coming. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'm going to skip all of these questions, and it hurts me to do so because, man, we're going to have a round 2 for sure. But I want to get to students. That's one question I definitely don't want to leave out and skip, because students are obviously one of the biggest reasons why we do what we do, or scholars. Let me change the way that I say that. How do you motivate scholars in today's world? When I feel like we grew up in just a different generation where we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have social media telling us who we need to be. How do you motivate scholars today?
Leah, you got that.
Okay. Honestly, I mean, I think that scholars are naturally motivated. They just aren't necessarily put in environments where they have the resources and the opportunities and the support to achieve their motivation. So, I mean, I think it's not something you give them or you provide to them. It's more that they're motivated. I mean, they're determined. They're ambitious. They've got dreams. Yeah. They've got goals. That's already in them, and that's given to them through their community and their family and their own internal values. And so I think really what happens in a lot of schools and a lot of institutions is that it's not recognized that that's already something that's part of them. And it's thought like, oh, we need to give this to them, or we need to let them know that they should be what they should be doing or what they should want in life. And in reality, I think if you provide them a safe space with lots of opportunities and lots of people that they can relate to, that come from their community, that understand them, that the opportunities you provide are safe for them and they find value in them, then you don't even need to worry about that. The motivation is already there. They're gonna do it. They're gonna rise to that occasion, you know.
I love that.
What is happening back there? You guys are talking.
He's already trying to find something to piggyback on. I told him no.
No, but I love
I
it.
muted him. Go ahead. He was trying to say something.
I said that was an excellent response. That was crazy.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I completely agree. You guys are hitting dingers, hitting some home runs. I must be giving you guys some softball questions because y'all are really hitting them out of the park. I have a brother-in-law. He's 12 years old and he walks so slow. Like everywhere we go, he walks so slow. He's like the coolest kid in the world, but he's just a slow walker. And I always tell people like, he's just always dragging his feet. And then the other day we were walking to a store that he wanted to go to, and I was just walking at my normal speed, and I realized like, wait, we're just walking normal. This is weird. Like I'm not turning around and he's not 50 yards behind me all the time. And that's when I learned like he's not slow. He just wasn't motivated when we were going to do the other errands. And so I love what you said, Leah. Like it's not that they're just naturally motivated. You just got to give them that safe space to be what they are, motivated. So I love that.
And then if you're gonna take it, like let's say take that question into the school environment, right? That's always the big question is, how do we motivate our students? How could we get them more engaged in curriculum? I don't know why I'm using that voice. That's my all educator voice. Okay. So that one's a little bit harder though. Like it is a difficult question because you're limited in what you can do with the scholar or student in that environment. When they go out of school, they go find stuff to do. Just like Leah said, they don't need motivation. They're going to do what they're going to do. And they have like all these things that are just, going off all around them, just like they can get into all kind of stuff. But school it's traditional schools. It's so hard because you're in a box. You only have 6 subjects to choose from to get motivated about. And then we're going back to that question, why should I be motivated about this when there's all these other things going on that are more appropriate to my time and my age and my interest right now?
Mm-hmm.
And so the trick becomes then, how do we figure out those interests? And how do we tap into that like inner self that you don't even share? So how we get to that too. And then now we can talk about how this curriculum is appealing to you and why you should care and why you should get there. We have to build a sense of urgency in education. And that's the fine line. That's the magic trick, is like where do we get that sense of urgency so the person is kind of tuned in during their time with us when there's all this other stuff that's going on in their head. Like, they got motion pictures probably popping above their head all day long. And we're trying to instill these skills and these ideals, but we're not giving them anything tangible when their whole life is tangible.
Well,
it's the relationships.
I think too, like decolonizing the curriculum, like making sure that they can, that they're represented in the information fairly and realistically, that they're being taught, so that they.
Well, one thing that
I personally struggle with it my whole life, right? Remember, I was in school, I was in class by myself, but I wrote all the poetry, I drew all the pictures for the school events, everything. High school, college, I was like, why do we have to take these classes that I couldn't for the life of me understand why we have to take these prerequisites just to get to the thing that I really want to do. It's so weird. So weird. So that's the problem. That's the issue.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's a word that all 3 of you have mentioned multiple times in different contexts is just the why. Like Baionne with the why behind why you feel that way if someone says a certain thing, or the why behind why you're taking that class, or the why behind getting motivated. So I think that's great that you guys are incorporating that in what you're doing at RVLA, and that you're bringing that to everyone else's attention listening. A really fascinating question that I really want to fit in before we wrap up. We have a couple more, and we'll kind of do a little bit more of a lightning round style so that we can get through a couple of these that I think are very valuable to our listeners. Is kind of, not a smooth segue, but an important segue, I believe, is there anything that you guys would like to see happen within your local, state, federal government? Because I think that question really brings some interesting answers. And if you don't, it's kind of a touchy subject too, so don't feel free to steer clear of anything that you'd rather not, any hot topics, but.
No, I would love to see more support go towards our scholars in Washington State around special education. We have a cap in Washington State for 13.5%. So at your school, you don't get funds beyond 13.5% for special education services to be provided to your scholars. RVLA and many other interurban district schools, whether they be traditional or charter, were all held to that same law. And most of us have, rates that are above 13.5%. I want to say like the traditional district is at about 15%. RVLA is at about 23%. So you can see like how much other additional funding needs to happen. Specifically for charter schools, I would say like the levy funding is another issue. We have families who are paying their taxes and doing all of those different things and, voting for levy funding, et cetera, but the levy funding does not actually come to charter schools. So we have scholars in our school, in our community that their families are paying taxes into, and they're never seeing any of that actually come to support them specifically. And then I think like for Washington State, there's a charter window where we can only have 40 charter schools across all of entire Washington State. And I think that's a little bit of a conundrum, if you will, because it means that there are other, global majority folks who are from communities who want to open up schools that give their communities a different choice, who are unable to do that. Based off of that right now with that and the window closed. So there's only 18 charter schools. So there's more room to hit the 40, but because they have closed, we still don't even get that additional like ramp up to the 40. So we're kind of shut down at 18 right now. And I just think that, again, like when we think about our global majority communities and what, we know about and what information is given to us after it's given to some of our white colleagues, we're behind the ball on being able to do certain things within community, or the funding is gone, or the law has been changed now, or, like other folks have been able to find these loopholes and do different things different ways. And then I would say lastly, like just accountability for all of our public schools and education systems. We need to do better about learning from one another. There is no secret to what we are doing, right? If someone wants to know, all they have to do is ask. We would be happy to teach them and to support them, because we don't want to be the only anti-racist school. We don't want to be the only school who's doing this work in our community the way that we're doing it. The crux of this conversation and argument between charter schools and traditional schools really should never be an argument, because we're both public schools and we should be giving more options to community members, specifically based off of public education. And our main goal should really be closing down private schools, because there's no use for them, because everything that you actually need is coming from a free public education system. And charters are just a choice within that system. And we're all working together to make sure that our communities are educated. So when I think about like the way that I would like, and I think like we also need to close down some schools that aren't, charter schools have a lot of autonomy, but we have a lot of oversight, and we have to be approved every 5 years in Washington State. We have some places that, have been very harmful to schools and to communities, and they've been open for 150, years in Washington State. And that in and of itself is a crime. Right. And so we need to have more accountability across all aspects to say, like, what do we need to do to make education better as a public system, regardless of it being traditional or being a charter? And we need to hold ourselves to that accountability and be willing to say, like, we're going to cut this entire staff. We're going to move all these folks out. Like, we're going to clean house. Like, you can't be in front of kids, you know, or we're going to ramp up other programs so that we have different types of educators coming in that can actually relate to the children that they're actually teaching. So I think that's what I would hope to see.
That's great. Those are really interesting points. Thanks for bringing those things up. For you guys have been, or you all have been so
good job.
I'm getting better. You all have been so patient with my questions, and you might have to be patient with me on this one. But for listeners like myself who aren't familiar with this term, Baionne, could you explain what global majority means?
Yes. So I kind of said a little bit earlier, but typically folks have been categorized as white or people of color. And what that has actually done is everything about the term people of color comes with a negative connotation, right? Like, we are the ones who are, or minorities, right? Like, that in of itself is a negative, you know, and quite frankly, by the converse of minority is majority. And we also know that our white colleagues are not the majority across this globe. So it's actually not factual, right? And so, and it is also left creating a negative space about who you are as a melanated person, specifically. Gotcha. And so when we say people of color, we don't say people of no color. Yeah. Like, most folks would feel insulted if you said people of no color, right? Like, I'm not a person of no color, I'm white, right? And even with that whiteness, even within whiteness, you have shed some of your cultural identity by simply calling yourself white, because you actually might be Scandinavian or German or Swedish, or, you know what I mean? Like, any number of French or any number of these other things. But instead, we've kind of done like in America, especially, we've done a frequent flyer of race, is what Dr. Alex G calls it, where you get your privilege card and your privilege card says white. And so you say white instead. And then everything else outside of that has been seen as a negative connotation for everybody else who is melanated, right? And in our country, specifically, Black and Indigenous folks who have been forced to be here or have been here and have been culturally deculturized in those spaces, like, there's an additional harm there as well, right? So never have I been able to sit in this space and think about the melanin that I have as something that has been a positive, or something that has given me pride in when I hear other folks who don't look like me say it. Right? Because instead it comes off as something almost like a disgust. Oh, they're Black. You know what I mean? Like, they're a person of color, they're BIPOC, they're this. But by saying global majority, I don't care how you want to say it, the words are very true and they give power to who I am as an individual. And I am a Black global majority person, right? So globally, there are more folks across this globe that are melanated. There are more folks that look like me than they look like you across this globe. Right. And so we are the majority. And so by having to say global majority, it also gives fact to the pride that I should feel about who I am. And so we intentionally do that with our scholars to make sure that they know, like, you are global majority, you are Black, you are Indigenous, and that is a space of power. And that is a space of something that you should be happy about. And that should be something that you should celebrate, rather than just simply saying you're a person of color or you're a minority. That doesn't give credence to the beauty that is being cultivated in these young children.
I'm really glad I asked you to specify more. That was a very eloquent and great answer. Thank you so much. I guess I'm just crossing off all of these questions that I'm saving for next time, because we're pretty much wrapped up for this episode. I wanted to get into so much more, and I'm excited to in the future, but I just kind of wanted to open up the floor, because there's nothing worse than being on an episode or on a podcast or on a part of a conversation where you feel like you had something to say and then the conversation closed before you could say it. And you're like, Well, I guess I'll just save it for next time. So I want to give all three of you just an opportunity. Is there a story, a quote, someone that has inspired you, a funny encounter, anything that you would like to share before we kind of wrap up this episode for now? Well, if you have something, feel free to share. But I guess the last thing I'd want to ask is, if you had a magic wand and just one thing could be done, and just that problem is gone, or that debt is gone, that school, that building is paid for, or we have a telephone system that does blank, what would be that one thing with the swish of the wand in regards to your charter school, not in regards to driving a Ferrari or something like that?
I have mine, but I'm not going to go first.
I got mine. I'm not going to go second. For me, as the Dean of Recruitment and Community Engagement, I don't think we said our titles. I have to worry about recruiting, but my real passion is in the connection of community and resources and opportunities and our youth that are here, right? And so I'm on this mission to gather all resources and opportunities with my community partners, get them on the same page as RVLA, and have those opportunities ready so our kids and families can go into their interests. Because the worst crime is when you have context, and no physical outlet for your interest or your skills or your talents. And this is coming from me personally, who went through it. You have to be able to have those outlets, because there's a lot of stories of a lot of great people in a lot of neighborhoods that coulda, shoulda, woulda been, right? And so I can't have that.
Yeah.
That's my personal mission. I can't have that.
I love that. Thanks so much, Lenny. Leah, do you have something?
Yeah.
Sure. I think that I feel like there's like two things. One is like Lenny said, like I think like eradicating the poverty and the instability that a lot of like the community is struggling with. I think if everybody had like a stable house and somewhere to live and food to eat and the resources they needed and transportation and all of those things, that education could look really different and people's lives would be a lot different and free up a lot of their time and energy to focus on the things that they want to focus on. I think, and then I also think like I would like to depoliticize charters. I think it prevents a lot of people from supporting charters publicly because they feel like it's a political issue and they'll get and that they can't be in support of charter if they're a certain political affiliation. And I think I think it's, it's not true. Charters aren't a political issue. Charters are an issue of equity and an issue of educational justice and liberation and providing people what they need when they need it in the way that they need it. And that should never be a political thing. That should always just be the right thing to do. And it shouldn't matter what political party you're affiliated with. You should be free to support what you think is right. So that's what I think a lot of more funding would come if people didn't feel like that.
Oh, I love that. Thanks so much, Leah. Baionne?
I think I would eradicate systemic oppression and racism, and make those whole who have been harmed by it. I think that
Mic
is,
drop.
yeah, I think that's one of the really big things. And I would also really want to eradicate this opportunity and wealth gap that exists as well. And really the opportunity gap, because it takes away so much and makes such an uphill battle for our community members and our scholars, just about the fact that like they weren't taught to read the way they were supposed to be taught to read because someone didn't do their job. So.
Well, I mean, obviously magic wands don't exist, but I'm inspired by the fact that you all aren't just waiting for a magic wand. You guys are being a magic wand to your community, and you guys are putting in the work. And it's not a simple, all right, it's all fixed. You all are really putting in the work. So I really appreciate that. I've always admired you all from afar, even though I haven't really gotten to know you all as well as I would like. But after this call, I'm even more blown away by your mission. I am more inspired to do what I can to be a part of RVLA's mission from afar. And I think anyone that listened to this is going to be very motivated as well by what you all are doing. It's a very special, unique mission, and I think it's something that a lot of people can and should get behind. Thank you so much. I've been truly elevated, inspired by everything that you've said. In the show notes, you all have mentioned some books. You all have mentioned some people. We're going to include links to all those things. So for those listening, if you want to listen to one of the, or I guess you can listen to a book now, but if you want to read the book, for example, Cultivating the Genius of Black Children by Dr. Sullivan, we'll have that link in the show notes. If you want to learn more about anything that's said, check the show notes and we'll include everything after. But once again, thank you, RVLA. And we'll catch everyone next time.
Thank you
so much.